Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, colleagues and friends. Welcome to the 2023 Alfred Deakin Institute Oration. Before we kickstart proceedings, I would like to invite Wurundjeri Elder, Auntie Joy, to come and offer welcome to country.
Hello everyone, great to be here this evening. I'd like to begin by saying that my son works with me now, which is a little bit lifts the burden of everything else, but driving from where we live is really good. So just want to say thank you, son, for getting me here, and you'll get me home. Hope he gets me home. No, seriously. But I'd like to begin by saying that we meet on my father's traditional lands, and great honour for me, privilege for me to be able to say that. And I want to pay my respects to all ancestors, elders and communities across this great nation and neighbouring islands. I want to pay my respects to each and every one of you, and from where you come from, what your belonging is, your family and your community. It's an interesting night for our minister to be able to speak on a civilisation and globalisation, and it kind of hits home in many spots, and with the upcoming election votes on Saturday and or leading up to that time. Just want to reflect on where I stand with that in terms of my father and myself and my eldest daughter, that I'd lived on this country, born on this country. My father was born in generations, of course, beyond me, and not recognised as legal citizens of this country. It will forever hurt. But when I had my first daughter, I kind of went, oh my God, what have I done? Brought this child into the world, this beautiful girl who is not going to be recognised. So 3 generations for me, at least in a living time, but more tragically for my dad and for those men of ours that fought in wars like my dad did in World War I, and as if he didn't go through enough with being not accepted as a legal citizen of this country and asked to enlist as an American Negro. And he said, I love my black brothers, but that I'm not. And then, of course, sadly for us, but more so for him, he died 10 years before 1967 referendum. So, those reflections for me and for what's happened since that time. And my father said some very important words to me just 5 days before I turned 14. And I'd asked him to leave me with something, and he said that you are who you are, be proud of who you are, but you are no better than anyone else. Couldn't quite grasp any sense out of that last sentence, but a little time along, I respected his word, and a little time along my mum told me that those words came from because when he was laying in the ditches, he didn't know who he was lying with. He didn't know where they came from. He didn't know what religion or belief they had, but he was a fella there fighting for all of us as we are today. And so for me, I think I've followed that journey of words and said that we are only who we are and what we can give. And if we're going to take, then we need to give back. But I for sure would, or in my father's word, welcome you, and am privileged and honoured to do that to his traditional lands. These are our gift for you tonight, and every other time that you walk on Wurundjeri country, and it's who we are. We're known as the Manigum people, and the Manigum my son gets for me along the way, and mainly at where we've been able to live all of our life. Many thanks to my father and Craig's grandfather for his service and refusing to leave his traditional lands on his return. This leaf is about the empowerment of who we are. And we'd lost a lot of that so much in the early times. And we've strengthened people who believe in us, like Deakin University. I do want to thank Deakin. They've done an amazing job for our students and, of course, looked well after our elders. So I do want to thank you and Deakin University for that, Liz. To you, though, this gift, and for those of your families that will come to this country, we say accepting this gift on their behalf will mean that they are given freedom of country. They are also welcome to everything from the tops of the trees to the roots of the earth. And it also means, because there's been acceptance of this gift, that we thank you and Noj Kumwar, and that you join with us to honour the spirits of our ancestors on my father's country and those who have nurtured country for thousands of years. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening. My language is the Woi Wurrung Wementukar Wurundjeri Balak Yemen Kundibik, and you are most welcome to the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri Woi Wurrung people. Noj Kumwar.
Thank you so much, Auntie Joy, for those most generous of words of welcome. And can I also begin by acknowledging and add my voice to Auntie Joy's welcome words, acknowledging that we are indeed meeting on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people and pay our respects to their elders past and present. And this is really important this week in particular because, as you know, in a few days' time, we all will go and cast our votes in relation to voice to Parliament. And it is an extremely important, of course, day and date for Australia as we reflect on how we want to really move forward as a nation and how we reflect on how we would like to acknowledge a constitutionally accommodating situation vis-à-vis first people of Australia, Indigenous Australians. And Auntie Joy reflected on the giving and the taking. And as a matter of fact, tonight's oration to be delivered by the Minister will very much reflect on giving and also taking responsibility for our region in terms of what we are going to be doing in the international development space. So back to the evening, this evening oration. I would like first of all to thank the Minister for accepting to be our orator in 2023. And I was telling him earlier that we have indeed paused the orations during the pandemic. ADI, the Alpha Deakin Institute, has been founded in 2015, and we endeavored to organize a platform for senior policymakers to come and share with us their vision for the country, where they would like to take Australia in terms of those specific portfolios. The last orator, indeed, was in 2019, and the Vice-Chancellor would remember, in this very venue, the then Honourable Minister Simon Birmingham, who was obviously Minister for Education at the time. And since then, the pandemic intervened, and we were not able to continue with these very important events in the Institute. The Alpha Deakin Institute, as I said earlier, is in many ways organized around themes of research that very much speak to the portfolio of the Minister. We have 4 large research programs, and I won't go into them, but one of them in particular speaks to governance, development, and peace. And I know that you no doubt will reflect on the connection, systematic connection, between social and economic progress and the prosperity for stable and sustained peace. In the region, a region that, of course, is extremely vital for Australia, given that, unlike other countries in the world who play a role in the international development and international aid, we are a wealthy, high-income country in a region that is predominantly a developing region. So the responsibility is much larger, much heavier. I think in a minute, I will hand over to our Vice-Chancellor, who would offer words of welcome, but also introduce the orator for 2023. But I wanted just to explain a few things about the events format tonight. It's quite unlike what we've done previously. So what we will do really is, following the Vice-Chancellor's welcome and introduction of the Minister, the Minister will take to the microphone. He will speak for about 20 minutes, and he will speak to the key themes of his portfolio. focusing, of course, on the new policy, I hope, International Development 2023, that's been just launched recently. Then we will, all the three of us, retire. This is why we have this nice setting here. And we're using technology very, very effectively tonight. And I think, where is Megan? Megan assures me that it will work. The way we will do it tonight is we will have a QR code on display. People can actually fire questions at us. They will come to me on a small iPad here, and then we'll go through the questions and prioritize some of them. We can't obviously cover all of them, given the short time that we have here, but hopefully we will have an interactive conversation with the Minister and the Vice-Chancellor about things to do with development, maybe the role of education, the connections between our institutions and institutions of our neighboring countries in the region. So if you think of any questions while the Minister is delivering his speech, or if you have already prepared your questions, please make sure that you do send them to us via the QR code. So without further ado, I would like to invite our Vice-Chancellor to welcome all of you and introduce the Minister.
Thank you very much indeed, Fethi, for the introduction. And can I just thank Auntie Joy again for a welcome to beautiful Wurundjeri country. And every time you put up the manna gum leaves there, it reminds me of the history and the architectural magnificence of manna gums and just how archetypally Australian they are. It is a link to country that is unmistakably here. Minister, thank you so much for honouring us with your presence this evening, and I'll come on to the formal introduction in a minute. Fethi, thank you for your role in leading ADI. Deakin University colleagues, executive members, staff, students, alumni and friends, members of the Diplomatic Corps, it really is a great pleasure to have you here with us this evening. As Fethi said, the Alfred Deakin Institute for Citizenship and Globalisation is focused on bringing the power of research in the humanities and social sciences to help understand and address some of society's most challenging questions. And I think one of those, and I'm going to bring this up because it's been topical, is this is part of Deakin's acknowledgement of the complexity of the Alfred Deakin legacy as opposed to the legacy of Deakin University. The two are inextricably linked, but different. And the ADI is taking the Deakin legacy forward and making that contribution to building that future-facing, genuinely inclusive Australia that acknowledges our full history. The researchers in ADI come from diverse disciplines and areas of study, and their important work informs scholarship, debate and policy, and as I said, helps us to understand what are incredibly complex issues around globalisation. But they also bring a reminder of the importance of humanities and social sciences to the future of the nation. I have two philosophers I regularly lean back on when I look for quotes, and it probably tells you more about me than it does anything else. One is Karl Popper, and the other is Bertrand Russell. And there's a Bertrand Russell quote that I use probably far too frequently, but I think it is relevant. Change is scientific, progress is ethical. Change is indubitable, whereas progress is a matter of controversy. And from that you take, if you're dealing with controversy, you can't just rely on science. You have to have humanities, you have to have social sciences. It's a very strong reminder why as a nation we cannot let that bit of our education system, our research system, go, atrophy, wither. As Fethi said, the oration is a wonderful opportunity for us to hear from some of the great minds in the nation, to give us a chance to contemplate on some of those really challenging questions and how they interface with policy, with government action, with global action. And this year, we're absolutely privileged to hear from the Honourable Pat Conroy, MP, Minister for International Development in the Pacific and Minister for the Defence Industry. The title for his oration, The Power of Aid, Australia's International Development Programme as a Statecraft Tool, could not be more topical at the moment. We all know it is a period of particular challenge in the Pacific. The headlines over the last week only emphasise some of that. There is an ever-evolving and complicated security, environmental, resources, diplomatic component to all of this. The work that the Minister does, alongside Foreign Minister Penny Wong, to reaffirm Australia's view of the Pacific is absolutely critical for our nation's future engagement and productive global engagement going forward. The policy Pat's going to discuss is a demonstration of this. He'll touch on it, but it is the first integrated concert and policy in this area for over a decade, and it's really important it's there. So the Minister grew up on the New South Wales Central Coast. He studied economics at the University of Sydney and graduated with honours in 2000. While studying, he worked part-time as an electorate officer for the Honourable Anthony Albanese. Pretty good choice. After university, he worked as an industrial and policy organiser for the Forestry Division of the CFMEU and then as policy advisor to Senator George Campbell. He's forged an impressive career and list of achievements, focusing on the development of significant policies in areas as diverse as defence procurement, climate change and energy, and industry and innovation. He was Principal Policy Advisor and Deputy Chief of Staff to the Honourable Greg Combet, who served as a Minister in the Rudd and Gillard Labor governments. And in 2013, Pat was elected to the House of Representatives as the member for Charlton, and following electoral redistribution as the member for Shortland in 2016, and again in 2019, and as we know now, again in 2022. He's had a very significant list of parliamentary service achievements, and I'm not going to read those out, but take it they are long and significant and distinguished. But importantly for tonight, in 2019, he was appointed Shadow Minister for International Development in the Pacific, Shadow Minister assisting Defence, and Shadow Minister for assisting Climate Change and Energy. And he's taken 3 of those 4 portfolios through into government. Tonight, I'm absolutely honoured and privileged to welcome to the stage the Honourable Pat Conroy. Thank you so much.
Good evening. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and particularly thank Auntie Joy for your beautiful welcome to country. It's a pleasure to see you again. I pay my respects to elders past and present and emerging, and I acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. Thank you to Vice-Chancellor Ian Martin and ADI Director Professor Mansouri for your warm welcome and for hosting me here tonight. And it's a great privilege to be here, and it's a great privilege to be the first Alfred Deakin Institute oration since 2019 in the dim dark days of pre-COVID, which seems like a lifetime ago. As has been advertised, I'm here to talk about Australia's engagement with the region through our International Development Program. It's a great discussion to have given the Institute's focus on equitable, sustainable change and tackling global challenges. But first, it's worth reflecting on this coming weekend, as has been alluded to by Auntie Joy and Professor Mansouri. We're all asked to vote to recognise First Nations Australians in our Constitution. And given Alfred Deakin's role in federation and our country's modern history, I would like to spend some time on this. And I know the Vice-Chancellor discussed this briefly, but I do think it's important to set the frame for what's happening on the weekend and my remarks today. Deakin was born in 1856 in Fitzroy, not far from here. His parents were among the thousands of British people who migrated to the other side of the world in the 1850s. Deakin came of age in an Australia that wasn't yet the country we know today, but a collection of colonies. After studying law, Deakin worked as a journalist for the Age, writing mostly about politics. At the very young age of 23, he was elected to Victoria's Parliament to represent West Burke. He was a driving force behind federation. In 1901, he became Australia's first Attorney General and then our second Prime Minister. He was an exceptional orator, deeply interested in the human condition. He believed passionately in a federated, democratic Australia. But there are significant parts of Deakin's history which are at odds with how we see Australia in the world now. In Deakin's time and thinking, Australia's place in the world was based on exclusion and the idea of the British race. Excluding so-called undesirable migrants through the Immigration Restriction Act and deporting Pacific Islander workers through the Pacific Island Labourers Act were efforts, he believed, that would maintain a unified and strong Australia. Never mind that many of the indentured Pacific Islander workers at the time had been kidnapped or tricked into coming to Australia. Imagine that for a moment. passing an act to expel people who were literally brought to this country against their will. In 1901, Deakin said that in a century's time, it was likely, and I quote, that Australia will be a white continent with not a black or even dark skin among its inhabitants. And I quote again, the yellow, the brown and the copper-coloured are to be forbidden to land anywhere. I wonder what Deakin would think of 21st century Australia if he could walk through the streets of Melbourne, of a multicultural Australia where half the population are born overseas or have parents born overseas, of an Australia which embraces its place in the Indo-Pacific region, that sees itself proudly as part of the Pacific family, of an Australia which celebrates the fact that it is home to the world's oldest continuing culture, and an Australia that is just 4 days out from a referendum which seeks to enshrine a voice to Parliament in the Constitution. As Victorian Chief Secretary, Deakin sponsored the Aboriginal Protection Amendment Act. It empowered the state to remove so-called half-castes from their communities, which would make them, and I quote again, useful members of society, as Deakin told Parliament. That act broke up families and communities. It tore children away from their families. It destroyed links to culture and country that are still being felt today. A few years later, Deakin would be in the thick of debates to determine what a federated Australia would look like. At the heart of this was what the Constitution would include. But, as historian Richard McGregor says, Aboriginal people barely registered in their planning for the new nation. Why bring all this up? It's not to pass smug judgment from the 21st century. It's so we can reflect on the past and how it has shaped the present. We haven't always gotten it right, and sometimes we've got it very wrong. But we can learn and do better. In that light, the Uluru Statement from the Heart seems a humble request. This is our national opportunity to show, indeed, that we can learn and that we can do better. And I take this moment then to urge you all to join me on Saturday in writing down yes on the ballot paper. Now, I know a lot of people at Deakin University have been grappling with Deakin's history and legacy, as the VC alluded to, working through what it means for us in the present. Professor Mark Rose was Deakin University's first Aboriginal student in 1978. Today he's the university's Pro-Vice-Chancellor for Indigenous Strategy and Innovation. And under Mark's guidance and with the full support and leadership of Professor Ian Martin, the university community has been working through this process. This has included close engagement with the descendants of Alfred Deakin. Mark said this process has been frank and respectful. I understand that the university community isn't interested in changing the university's name. But what you are pursuing is truth-telling, to acknowledge the past, to learn, and to do better. This means listening to your First Nations students, faculty and community, and responding. It means embedding respect and understanding in Deakin's faculties, making sure First Nations students get a great education. And I know that for Mark and the Deakin community, this journey is not yet over. There remains much work to do. And I see strong parallels between that process, what we seek to do here in Australia through the referendum, and what we seek to do overseas through our international development program. It comes down to listening with respect and humility to people and communities, to understand their priorities and their aspirations, and then working out how we can draw on all the tools available to us to get better outcomes. In the region, we know that Australia's international development program is something our partners greatly value. The Australian government's development program now provides nearly $5 billion a year in assistance to lower income countries. We support their economic development, and combat poverty and disadvantage through their populations. It has positive impact for peoples and communities, but we also know it hasn't always hit the mark. One of this government's major priorities on taking office was to produce a new international development policy, and we released it in August this year. To shape this policy, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade spoke to more than 300 people across Australia and the region. They read more than 200 written submissions, and they were informed by an advisory group of experts from a range of sectors and across the political spectrum, including former ministers of the Crown. And our development policy sets the direction, intent, and ambition for our development program over the long term. Embedded in it are the principles of respectful listening, acting on partner priorities, and working in genuine partnership with governments and communities across our region. And the truth is, Australia and countries across the Indo-Pacific have a shared vision for the region we live in. A peaceful, safe, and prosperous region where sovereignty is respected and agreed rules and norms are upheld. Where no country, large or small, dominates. Where we live sustainably, in harmony with our climate and environment. Where we shape our own destinies. And what we do today and how we meet our shared challenges will have a real and lasting impact on Australia and all of us in this region, because we are part of this region. That is a geographical fact. And beyond simple geography, Australia is home now to people who have roots in almost every country around the world. And we are enormously strengthened by this diversity. Our region and our world is complex and interconnected, which brings so much opportunity and benefit. But our challenges are equally complex and interconnected. Climate change, economic development, human rights, intensifying geostrategic competition. And so today, Australia is investing in all the elements of Australia's national power to contribute to peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific. Because peace and stability are fundamental building blocks for economic, social, and human development and welfare. Of course, defence remains an essential component of our security. And that is why Australia has entered into the AUKUS agreement and why we're investing transparently in our defence capability. But that's just one part of the equation. In fact, the Defence Strategic Review, commissioned by the government, recommended resourcing and positioning the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade to lead a whole-of-government effort in statecraft in the region. And as part of this, we are putting our development policy at the heart of statecraft, because the Albanese government recognises that our future is tied to the success of the region. With 22 of our nearest neighbours being developing countries, we must understand their development aspirations and challenges if we are to understand the region. For a department like DFAT, that means that our diplomatic, economic and trade teams all need to become deeply familiar with development dynamics. It means we need to understand development if we are to be better negotiators and collaborators. And it means our whole system needs to better understand development if we are to be an effective partner. But this approach can't be limited to DFAT alone. And we're beginning work now to better understand, measure, and assess how all parts of the Australian government are working with the region. My colleagues in the Albanese government understand just how important this is, and our international development policy has been supported by Cabinet. And I am the first Minister for International Development and the Pacific to be appointed as a permanent member of the National Security Committee of Cabinet to demonstrate the centrality of our development program. It is not the poor cousin of orthodox diplomacy, or trade policy or defence policy. It is an essential element of advancing Australia's interests, shaping how our nation is perceived internationally, and most importantly, lifting people out of extreme poverty and contributing to peace and stability. By helping lift people out of poverty, Australia's international development policy advances our strategic interests in shaping a region that is stable and secure. It also advances our economic interests in a region that can share the benefits of growth and prosperity. But development policy does more than advance our interests. It also affirms the values that are inherent in Australian foreign policy. Values like support for democracy and equality, human rights and social inclusion, and the international rules-based order. That is why I see development policy as lying at the heart of Australian statecraft. It furthers our self-interested core foreign policy priorities at the same time as it gives expression to our altruistic, idealistic goals of shaping a better world. Given our high aspirations for Australian development policy, this government understands that in our region like ours, we can't just continue to do things as we always have. The way we are going to do this is laid out in the new international development policy. An effective international development policy is a powerful tool for change. And as we reshape how we deliver our development policy, we are focused on doing this in 5 key ways. And this is something I'm incredibly passionate about. This is the heart of our policy. These 5 ways are, it's based on the priorities of our partners. It's about relationships, not transactions. We are transparent and we use every opportunity to drive local employment, procurement and skills development, and we make a high quality offering. And this approach in itself is a critical differentiation when it comes to thinking about our international development program as a tool of statecraft. These principles give our neighbours choices. They underpin the idea of a true partnership. Every investment with our neighbours builds prosperity and stability. It builds a stronger and more cohesive region and deters conflict and instability. Ultimately, it is an investment in the future of our region and ourselves over the next 5 and 50 and 100 years. And our development policy is driven by these underlying principles of listening to countries and communities respectfully and then working with our partners to deliver them. Every dollar in our development budget will reflect what our partners in the region have said matters most to them. And at the very top of this list is climate. Climate change is an existential threat to the countries of the Pacific, and we are seeing its impacts in real time. And they will only worsen. More frequent and more intense disasters will destroy people's homes, communities and livelihoods, and damage infrastructure, connectivity and agricultural land. Clean water will be harder to get. Food will be harder to grow. Rising sea levels will displace entire communities who have lived for generations in the same place. Those impacts aren't restricted to any one country. Here at home, the Albanese government has put in place ambitious climate emissions reduction targets towards net zero by 2050. We're working to become a renewable energy superpower. And climate change, in particular adaptation and resilience building, is a central focus of our development policy. We have set climate change funding targets for the first time ever in our development policy. From next financial year, at least half of all major new development investments will have a climate change objective, and we'll grow that to 80% within 5 years. We've also committed to major new climate initiatives in the region, like our climate resilient infrastructure partnerships with the Pacific and Indonesia. We will be rejoining the Green Climate Fund, recognising its value as the most prominent global climate finance fund. But we're also putting our shoulders to the wheel to ensure that the GCF and other multilateral funds actually deliver for the Pacific. We will strengthen our previous commitment of $2 billion in climate finance from 2020 to 2025. And in fact, we are now on track to deliver $3 billion towards the global finance climate goal through our previously announced ODA commitments. And importantly, our climate investments and all of Australia's development work should be locally led. And that goes back to our commitment to listening, engaging, and working directly with our partners on their priorities. And it goes to our commitment to supporting civil society and local leadership, including through our new Civil Society Partnerships Fund. We unapologetically believe that human rights are fundamental for sustainable economic, environmental, and social development. Another key priority of our development policy is equality. Equality for women and girls, and equality for people with disabilities. These issues cut across all our development work. And as Foreign Minister Penny Wong said, gender equality is not a nice objective to be deferred or deprioritised against serious matters of health or economic priority. It is a prerequisite for those other objectives to be achieved. And as transparent partners, we are open and upfront with our neighbours that these issues, climate change, gender equality and disability equality, are our priorities in this space, just as they are here at home. Gender equality and reduced inequalities, including for persons with disabilities, are two of the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And every UN member state agreed to these commitments to a better world. We've made progress on the SDGs, but we know that in the last few years, some of that progress has stalled and even gone backwards, especially for women and girls. They are disproportionately affected by conflict and crisis, as are people with disabilities. So we need to protect what we've achieved because the SDGs are core to what Australia is doing, both in the region and globally. But that work shouldn't just happen in government offices in Canberra, as vital as that is. It needs to happen across this country and this region, through diaspora communities, through civil society and philanthropic organisations, through schools and universities like Deakin, through media and the arts, through sporting clubs, banks, unions and faith groups. And to return to my opening comments tonight, we want to embed the perspectives of First Nations people throughout all our development efforts, drawing on their leadership and agency, developing and establishing real partnerships. Because think of what we could do if we harness all the talent, empathy and drive of Australia across this country and coordinate and share more effectively. Our new international development policy squarely calls for a whole-of-nation effort in this space for the first time. Well, all of you here tonight have chosen to come to listen to this speech, presumably because you're interested in how Australia sees our place in the world. So you too are critical parts of what the government means when we say that international development is at the heart of our statecraft. You are part of the projection of Australian values, expertise and know-how into the region that will help us rise to the challenges we face. Supporting sustainable development across the region is a collective effort and it's something that will benefit us all. And in the time I spend speaking to you this evening, more than 5,000 babies will be born around this world. No doubt a few of them right here in Melbourne, and hundreds more across Australia, the Pacific and Southeast Asia. What kind of world are we building for them? What kind of future are they inheriting? In my very first speech to Parliament a decade ago, I said I believe that empathy, putting oneself in other people's shoes, was a crucial quality. What would my life be like if I'd been born in a nation without a quality public education system or without access to quality healthcare through Medicare? Recognising the accident of birth gave me a great advantage over other people in our society and a crowd around the world has driven my passion for politics. So those children born today will be 7 in 2030, the date by which the world agreed to fully implement the SDGs. Will they be free from hunger? By 2050, they will be 27. Will they have decent work? It's my sincere belief that Australia's development program will help build a more peaceful, safe and prosperous region where children born today will grow up knowing that they will be able to go to school, regardless of their gender or if they have a disability. They will have food and clean water. They will be free from fear and violence. They will be able to chase their aspirations. Ladies and gentlemen, Australia's development program is about securing our country's and our region's future. Because if our region is secure, we are secure. If our region is prosperous, we prosper. But our development program is also about who we are as a nation, as a people. Alfred Deakin wanted this country to be a democracy of great people, doing great things. And I believe we are that country, although maybe not in quite the way Deakin envisaged it. And I think that's a good thing. I believe that Australians should be proud of our development program and proud of our country. I certainly am. Our development program helps lift people out of poverty. It improves countries' governance and helps fight climate change. It saves lives. Our development program reflects our nation's character and our values of fairness and equality. It reflects a country that is confident in the world, that is a good neighbour and partner, that knows we can always learn and do better, and that is working to build an open, safe and prosperous region for everybody. So to conclude, I return to Alfred Deakin. While I have no doubt we would have a lot to say to each other if we ever met, I offer a short extract from his journal which I find interesting. In his musings on politics in May 1905, Deakin wrote that he saw a future where great crises would drive the people of the world to come together. And I quote, "Despite wars, nationalities, languages, we are part of a world state. We need individual men and women who think out our condition and future as citizens of the world. In that capacity, we rise above realms and races to the standard of common humanity," end quote. In that, I think he was right. But where Deakin's musings were driven by thoughts of crises and curiosity about how things might happen, I see purpose and opportunity. Our international development program, built on respectful listening, true partnership, and acting on partners' priorities, is one of the best tools we have to work with the region around us, meeting our common challenges, delivering our common aspirations, and demonstrating our common humanity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. As I said before we started, we will have the ability of fielding some questions from the audience. So I'll join you over there in a minute. And I think Georgie will have an iPad. Yeah, it is on right now. So thank you very much, Georgie, the power of technology. The good thing, they're all anonymous. So it is. But let me, before obviously I start looking at all the questions that are coming my way and perhaps go through some of them and try to synthesize to save some time, I want to, of course, first acknowledge that this policy is a significant progress on what we've had for more than 10 years now under the previous governments, in the sense that there is a clear vision, there are clear guiding principles, clearly projects certain values that Australia wants to utilize in pursuing those objectives. And I think everyone here would welcome all of those key advances, if you like. But let me play the devil advocate for a minute, Minister, please, and allow me to do that. A lot of members of the OECD countries, for instance, would say it's all good for Australia to say that we are doing more, that we are doing it in ways that do two things, which is really help with progress, both economic and social, but also ensure that we are playing our role internationally. But a country like Denmark, like Sweden, like a number of OECD countries would say, hang on, but you're still spending significantly less in terms of per GDP, per capita GDP, around 0.22%, than they do, which is about 1%. When will the money follow the rhetoric?
Well, thank you for the question, and I'll answer it in a couple of ways. First, the money is already matching the rhetoric. So last year's budget saw the biggest increase in the international development budget for over a decade. This year's budget returned indexation to the aid budget, which is critical to making it grow. So over the medium term, we will restore the cuts that were made to the budget under the last government, $11.8 billion worth of cuts. That will be restored over the medium term. But it's also important to compare apples with apples. And I don't want to get into a technocratic argument about how you define development, but I think we take the purest measurement of development of anyone in the world. So, for example, when you compare our percentage of GNI to other countries, we intentionally don't include things like refugee settlement services in Australia. So you look at all those countries in Europe, some of them, more than half their aid budget is settling asylum seekers in their own country. Very important to do. We exclude that expenditure from our measurement. So I think that's really important to note. Secondly, and this is a change from the last government had, to be frank, they were a bit scared about using the word the words international development, so they had a hard cap on it. So when other departments spent money on international development, if they counted it, you would have to reduce the amount of foreign aid coming from DFAT. We've released that cap, so we've now started to measure what other government departments do around international development, because other parts of government do that. But back to my original point, the aid budget is increasing, and over the medium term, it will be restored to what was cut under the last government.
Thank you, Minister. Just before, I'm really pleased and surprised by the number of questions that are coming my way. It makes my job very difficult. I was hoping for a few questions, but there's a lot of them here. I would like to ask the Vice-Chancellor perhaps to offer some initial reflections on this speech and on where education, and I know Deakin has been obviously doing its share bit in terms of establishing campuses in the region. How does education play in the big picture here, Ian?
There's two components to the question. The first is the reaction to the speech, which is the closing remarks around if our friends and partners in the region prosper and are secure, we are both secure and prosperous as well. And I think this is not a zero-sum game. This is a multiplicative game. And I think that is the single most important thing. As far as education goes, it is a key part of any development strategy. We all know that universities play a role in soft diplomacy, but the education piece is really important as well. Now, I don't know whether this statistic is still true, and some of my public health colleagues might criticise me, but one of the strongest determinants of long-term adult health is the educational level that your mother achieves. And I think that still holds true. So by investing in education, you're not only benefiting one generation, you're benefiting the generations that come behind as well. And I think it is there. That having been said, there are some hooks. We have to be careful that that education is genuinely giving back to those communities. Too many of the efforts have actually taken the best and ablest from our friends and neighbours and exfiltrated that talent and not provided talent going back. We've got to be careful that we do it right and we do it carefully.
Thank you, Ian. As a matter of fact, there was a questions on education, some questions, and I lost the screen here. But one of the questions here, Minister, was about, you stated that local partnerships in the region are extremely important. how optimistic are you that the engagement strategy with local partners will actually deliver what the local communities want?
I'm optimistic for a couple of reasons. One, where we've been really serious in engaging with our partner nations in how we've designed this policy and how we implement it. So in my travels to the Pacific, both myself and Foreign Minister Penny Wong have been very clear with the governments and the people of those nations. You set the priorities for our development partnership, and that's reflected in a variety of announcements we've made around individual projects. Secondly, one of the most important follow-on actions I did when we released our development policy is I did a Teams meeting with the heads of mission for every one of our consulate, our high commissions and embassies in a development partner country. And I was very strong with the ambassadors and the high commissioners that their job is to implement this policy and be driven by the priorities, not just of the governments we deal with, but with the people of those nations. And that's critical if we're to have success. And quite frankly, I think it's a key differentiator of our development program from how other governments around the world do it.
There was a question about the outcome of the vote on Saturday and the extent to which that, should there be an outcome that's not very positive, how is that likely to impact Australia's engagement with the region? This is one of the anonymous questions.
No, I understand, and I do get this a lot. I should make it very clear, this is a choice for Australians, and it's very important that we're very focused on persuading every single Australian to vote yes. But I will make the point, why are we pursuing the voice? We're pursuing the voice because it is the critical ask from the Uluru Statement from the Heart, and it is a concrete way of improving the lives of First Nations Australians. And how we treat First Nations Australians affects our international standing. I can assure you of that. So the voice, by improving outcomes for First Nations Australians, will improve our standing in our region.
Thank you, Minister. There's a question which is obviously in relation to climate change and the options that Australia is pursuing in that space. And I will read it to you because there's no other way of summarizing it. To what extent does our reliance on exporting fossil fuels, gas and coal, as well as enablers like ammonia to East Asia undermine our efforts in the Pacific?
I don't believe they undermine our efforts, and that's for a few reasons. One, the two most important ways that Australia can contribute to fighting the climate crisis is by taking strong action domestically, and we're doing that through net zero emissions by 2050, strong medium-term targets, achieving 82% renewable energy by 2030. So strong domestic action, which is where we're responsible for our emissions. And secondly, strong international leadership. The $3 billion in climate finance I mentioned, but as importantly, amplifying the voice of the Pacific. So one of my first actions as the Pacific Minister was at the Pacific Island Forum Foreign Ministers meeting was to announce that the new government would be supporting the efforts of Vanuatu to get an International Court of Justice opinion on climate change. The previous government had been blocking that ICJ advisory opinion. We were supporting it. One of my first actions was to represent Australia at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in in Rwanda. And the Tuvalu Foreign Minister got up in the forum and was arguing passionately for a process to amend the international maritime laws so that when islands do disappear because of climate change, and unfortunately some will, that you don't lose the exclusive economic zone around that island, you don't lose the economic rights to the fishing. I then got up to speak immediately after him, and I could see the faces in the crowd expecting, oh no, here's Australia, they're just going to get up and block action. And I got up and actually said, Australia supports this. This is really important. We were instrumental at the UN COP in Sharm el-Sheikh in fighting for loss and damage to be put on the agenda for that conference and for it to be landed. And we're obviously pursuing hosting a COP in conjunction with the Pacific. So we are taking strong action domestically. We are being a strong voice for climate action internationally. And the Pacific understands that that's where our focus is.
Very good. Just a question perhaps where Ian's perspective might also be important and relevant, which is in relation to Australia being in this region, as I said earlier. And in this region, one of the biggest challenges we have is freedom of mobility. We are not really making it easy to a lot of Southeast Asians and Pacific Islanders in particular to come to Australia. And of course, this will have implications also for what we would like to do in the education space in terms of exchanges and the likes. So to what extent is the government working perhaps with universities to really reform and make a little easier the situation in relation to mobility in the region?
Yeah, we're very focused on it, and it's something that's frequently raised by other members of the Pacific family with us, and obviously Southeast Asian nations. So we're doing concrete things like establishing visa processing offices in Papua New Guinea and in Vanuatu, so it's easier for people to get visas. Secondly, we're ramping up the Pacific Australia Labour Mobility Scheme, which is not just critical to filling labour shortages here. More importantly, it's a development task. It is sending home $15,000 a year on average for workers in a region where between a third and a half of all Pacific Islanders live on $1,000 a year. And the one I'm most excited about is the Pacific Engagement Visa, where for the first time in the history of this nation, we will allocate a share of our permanent migration intake to one specific region of the world to build the Pacific diaspora. It's revolutionary. The legislation is going through Parliament right now, and that will make it easier for movement between countries in the Pacific and Australia, and I'm really excited by it.
Very good. Ian, any thoughts on that?
Look, I am only going to support what's just been said, that sense of carefully crafted economic mobility is really important. But at the same time, it is also important when we look at the broader visa settings that we make them right for Australia. And at the same time, we're advocating as a university for opening up in some levels, we're actually backing the Home Affairs in tightening up some of the other visa settings to make sure that we get the balance right and we're genuinely using our visa settings not only for the benefit of Australia but for the benefit of our partners. And I think it's a really difficult line to walk, but I think what we're seeing at the moment is getting that balance more appropriately adjusted.
Thank you both. Just a question from the floor again, which is, I will read it literally because there's a bit of nuance in it, which is, how do you assess the influence of our aid program against that of the Chinese aid program in the Pacific region? Elephant in the room.
It is indeed an elephant in the room. Look, I can only focus on what we do rather than what other countries do. And that's why at the heart of my speech are the 5 principles that drive our development program. And these 5 principles, I feel like, not that I would do this because I respect workplace rights, if I could get them tattooed on the chest of every DFAT official, I would. I'm sure we don't need that extreme measure, but those 5 principles are critical. First, we listen and act on the priorities of our partner nations, so it is their priorities. Secondly, we do it transparently. Thirdly, it is based on long-term relationships. It's not transactional. Fourthly, we engage local procurement. I want a double economic dividend for every piece of infrastructure we build in the region, where not only do we fund a piece of infrastructure to expand an economy, we use local companies and local workers to do it and get skills transfer. And fifthly, we deliver high quality infrastructure. Those 5 things set our development program apart from other countries that I won't name. And we're not just doing it for our development program, we're partnering to do that effectively. So recently, there was an Asian Development Bank project in, I want to say Tonga, I'm getting the nod from my team, where we topped it up. There was a project that was being funded by the ADP, it was a port project. We added a bit more money to ensure that they got a high quality contractor to build it that would use local labour and that would stand the test of time. So that's how our development policy offering is helping our partners the most.
Very good. And I think I'm being told by the events team that we need to wrap up in a few minutes. Just a really interesting question which connects education and business with the international development policy. Can the Minister explain, and perhaps the Vice-Chancellor as well in a minute, explain the power of business investment in key sectors for regional countries, e.g. education, digital, renewable energy, to complement development assistance?
Oh, it's absolutely critical. And it's not just private sector investment, it's mobilising philanthropic investment and doing impact investing. So one of the development policies was a $250 million impact investment fund that we announced, coincidentally also called ADI, but this time Australian Development Investments, which will mobilise 5 private sector dollars for every dollar of Australian investment aimed at addressing things like gender equality and inclusive development. But economic development has to be crucial and critical to this. That's why the PALM scheme is really important, but getting investment into Pacific countries so that they have a sustainable economic base. My heart sings with joy, for example, when I meet returned PALM workers who say that they've started up new businesses in their home country based on the money they saved while working in Australia and the skills they developed while working in Australia. So that's a great example of all the tools of statecraft working to build economic resilience in our partner nations.
Minister, we did choose ADI very carefully as the acronym. So it was, Vice-Chancellor, in terms of education and also having the power to change and to advance those programs, those interests for Australia.
I mean, I'm a stuck record on this, but if you don't bring the education system along, you're not going to have the workforce who have the skills, the capabilities to maintain those investments. And one of the tragedies of overseas investment that you see a lot is foreign aid agency comes in, puts a high-tech solution into an environment without thinking about who's going to maintain it, who's going to look after it for the next 20 years. It's not integrated, it's not joined up with education and skills, and it's not stable. And I think that's why you've got to do it all. And those local investments in local capabilities are both really exciting, but also I'd say can spin back into Australia. A locally generated sustainable energy resource for Samoa is perfectly applicable to many regional and rural areas of Australia. We can work together and get synergies.
Absolutely. Look, there's so many questions. The technology has worked. Georgie, thank you very much. And Tamara, I'm just bombarded with questions. Can I leave you with one question which I have to ask you? One of the audience, members of the audience says, please convince me to vote yes.
Really? Okay, well, that's interesting. I'll say a few things, and it's hard because I want to look at the person who asked it, but it's anonymous. So
anonymous.
I'll say, oh, there we go, up the back. You're being very honest, madam. Thank you. I'll say a few things. One, what we are doing now is not working. What we're doing now is not working. The average life expectancy of a First Nations person is 10 years less than every other Australian. Secondly, there are more Indigenous males in prison than in the university system. What we're doing now is not working. We have to try something different. And this is a simple request, a request from the collective leadership of First Nations Australians as something that will make a meaningful difference. And I'll give you an example of how it could be powerful. And this is, there's a lot of publicity around what's happening in Alice Springs. And it's tied partly to the ending of the alcohol ban that occurred under the last government that then bridged over to our government. The local First Nations people were saying, don't end that grog ban. But no one in the federal government at the time was listening. Imagine how their voice could be amplified by a voice to Parliament talking to ministers as often as required. So for me, policy gets better when you listen to the people you're making the policy about. And that is effectively what the voice is. And that's why we should vote yes.
I think on that very positive note, we have to leave it there. Minister, we could actually go on for much longer. There's so many questions here from the audience. Clearly, there's a genuine interest in international development. I know that everyone welcomes the new policy that's been released recently. There are a lot of encouraging, I think, strategies that you are pursuing, and we certainly see at least the direction of where we want to go. Clearly also, people want to see more in this space, at least in terms of lifting investment in relation to dollars. But we say thank you for being here tonight, and we look forward to seeing how the policy is being implemented. Vice Chancellor, thank you very much also for sharing your thoughts with us. Before we bring these proceedings to conclusion, I will ask the Vice Chancellor to do the honors and present the Honourable Minister with a gift from Deakin as a thank you, gesture of thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And sorry, before we bring things to a conclusion, Vice Chancellor, I have to thank members of the Deakin events team, Georgie, Tamara, Celeste, everyone, in particular Georgie and Georgia, who've done a fantastic job in putting this event together, but also members of your office, David and George Mankos, in terms of really helping us with planning these events. We've been working closely together for the last few years. Michael, I should have said, of course. I'm still thinking about George. Michael, of course. And thank you, Vice Chancellor, for hosting it, and thank you all for being here tonight.